Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
And from California, this is Dialogue Assassination with political research specialist Mae Brussell. And here asking stupid questions is Phil Kogan.
They're not bad. I like
Not
your
bad.
questions. They're direct and they clarify what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I talk too fast and I assume that everybody...
Sometimes I can't get a word in edgewise.
Well, I'll stop. You just poke me.
Okay.
Start talking, I'll stop.
Dialogue Assassination is a program about politics and about the intrigue that sometimes takes the form of conspiracy, as Mae Brussell would call it, and she documents that with numerous pages of research compiled over, 9 years. 9 years of research. And if you don't agree with everything that Mae says, the least you can do is examine it for yourself and see where you can find fault. In many cases, you can't.
One of the things I wish people would do would be to take a tape or cassette of the show, and they can always erase it later and put something else on, but take them for newsletter. And it will go out every 2 weeks. It's 24 issues, twice a month. And for $8, you can get a subscription to the magazine Realist, which comes out 6 times a year, and the Conspiracy Newsletter, which will come out every other week. Conspiracy Newsletter will be my newspaper. I will speak for other researchers through me. They can put anything in that newspaper that I choose to do it. It will have 28 columns every 2 weeks, Phil, each related to political assassination. And I broke down the subject matter of my research into these various categories, and anything that comes up in the news or in my past research can fit into one of these 28 columns, and they'll run every 2 weeks. And if you collect these, I guarantee they'll be collector's items. If you save these and put them together and maybe cut them up and put them into columns, you'll have 28 different subjects, books that I'll publish maybe at the end of 1 year. If we keep going that long, if the government lets us, the only thing will stop us is not lack of material. It would only be the government that would come down trying to hurt me or somebody doing this. Otherwise, we'll keep going. And then you'll have a chance to examine the news of the day and compare it to the past research.
Okay, now the address here that we can give out is Conspiracy Newsletter, care of The Realist, 595 Broadway, New York City, New York, zip 10012. Let's run through that again for people who are writing it down. Conspiracy Newsletter, care of Realist, 595 Broadway, New York, New York, 10012. It's $5 a year.
Well, the Realist is $3 a year, and the newsletter is $5 a year. But if they send $8, if everyone here goes on a vegetable fruit diet and gives up the meat or the cigarettes or the goodies for 1 week, it'll pay the $8, and they will have 52 weeks of reading material. One will come out every other week. But in the 13th anniversary issue of The Realist, that it will be on the stands next month, I have an article titled How Richard Nixon Came to Power. And if any of you don't like what he said about bombing North Vietnam and escalating this war from the air, if you didn't like the speech that he gave during the week on what he intends to do in Vietnam, and if you mistrust Richard Nixon and you don't like what he is doing, I suggest that you subscribe to this and get the 13th anniversary issue. There also will be an article in there by Paul Krasner on Charles Manson, and there will be material in The Realist that backs up or written by me every issue along with the newsletter. I'll be writing an article in there every month. So $8.
Okay. Maybe we can repeat that later on in the show.
Okay, now in the news this week there was an article that Lyndon Johnson's library is cracking down, and I pulled into my...
Literally cracking down?
Literally cracking down. In 1971, in June, the library was dedicated, and he had a lot of public officials there, and there was a cartoon in the San Francisco Chronicle, which I had, and over the title it has a picture of the building, and it says Lyndon Baines Johnson Shrine, Temple, and Museum. And on the door there's a little sign that says Holy Water. You know, down at the ranch he sells water from the Pernambucas River. There's gift shops at the entrance near his ranch. And then it shows Lyndon walking around with a dossier that says top secret Vietnam study, and a little guy standing over in the corner in the library, and the cartoon has this great big crack down the side of it, and a little guy is saying the whole thing is built on a fault. So 1 year later, less 2 months, the paper said this week that this expensive library cost $18 million, the most expensive ever built to honor an American president, is cracking and falling apart 11 months after the dedication. The cracks and missing slabs are primarily in the fountain and railing, but the 8-story building is being held up by scaffolding, and the building is falling down. But lest you worry about Lyndon Johnson falling down, heart attack and all, this weekend, while you're listening maybe to this show, Richard Nixon and Mrs. Nixon, John Connally, Lyndon Johnson, are in what I call a war huddle down in Texas. I think they have reason to be. I got information from a researcher this week that a Canadian intelligence agency is tying in the connections of Oswald, again, Nazis, Ruby, the syndicate, and the documentation available to the researchers soon that backs up everything that I've been saying all along on these shows. And I feel that there's so much material that's going to come out in the next year, and there's so many positions these men have to take, that the meeting in Texas this weekend is what I call a war huddle. I talked about the war huddle in the home of Clint Murchison with Richard Nixon, J. Edgar Hoover, the night before John Kennedy was killed. Such a meeting is taking place in Dallas this weekend. So while his building is falling, they still have plans, a lot of other plans that we will not know about unless somebody attends this particular huddle and passes the information on. Now this Sunday, tomorrow I'm going to speak at the Unitarian Church in Pacific Grove. They're having a 3-week conference on violence. And the pastor in charge asked me to speak. This is the third of this series. And I said, I'll talk, my favorite subject, the granddaddy of them all, the political assassinations. Because when you overthrow a country, when you have a coup d'etat in 24 hours and the whole government changes hands, it seems like a very simple thing. There isn't much bloodshed. The power goes to another group. But the thing that I will be discussing with them is the insidious process that happens to a nation before the coup takes place. Because in order to effect such a clean coup like you did in Greece or in many, many other countries since World War II, you have to meet secretly. You have to have the clandestine kind of mind. You have to work against your brother, and you have to snitch on other people, and you have to witness killings of your opposition and have secret meetings. The preparation for the actual coup takes years. You have to have the idea in your head, and you have to replace taxi cab drivers and grocery clerks and newspaper columnists, and it's this insidious double life that many, many people are living that permeates the atmosphere before the coup actually takes place. And these double standards when a man comes home to his family and he is in on the planning stages, it must reflect in simple vibes all over the area so that when the coup takes place, it seems bloodless. But the general feeling that permeates the whole area before is a double standard. It's like a man planning to do a robbery or keeping a secret of a murder or something. He has to live 2 lives. Everyone who's involved in the coup lives 2 lives. So the violence, the outward violence, may seem very little. So Robert Kennedy was killed. Nobody very much was hurt. A few people were shot in the Ambassador. But the preparatory stages for the killing and then the killing of the vital witnesses who could give information takes place constantly. So there's 2 types of violence. There's the open violence where you stand up and blow a man's head off, like with Martin Luther King or Robert Kennedy or John Kennedy, and then there is the preparation, and then there's the silent violence of killing afterwards. And that permeates right down to your local community. So I'll be speaking there tomorrow on that subject, and then Tuesday I'm going to Monterey High, and I want to bring that up because the history teacher said that the classes were talking about credibility gaps. Where is truth? Where are lies? You had a news broadcast this week about the ITP and Mr. Rehnquist changing his story. Kleinditz, rather. That's a lie. First he doesn't remember, and then he remembered the conversation, right? Mr. Kleinditz is telling lies. Dita Baird had a heart attack supposedly, and the doctor in Maryland said she had is under investigation from the Justice Department. They called members of Congress at great expense to that hospital and set up a machine, and the doctor took heart tests all the time she was talking, and then she had this great big seizure, and all of the Washington representatives went home to preserve her health, and the following week or two she had a television conference on the same subject. So they got two doctors in Denver, Colorado, to give more information of follow-up on her heart condition, and they sent a report to Washington that there's nothing to follow up, that she never had a heart disease. No objective thing was ever registered. Then it turned out that the doctor who gave her the test while members of Congress was there is under criminal investigation of the Justice Department for other matters. So the history class has asked me to talk about lies, and this gets back to an article that was in the paper today, that the anti-mood is catching up with the press, that people are suffering from anti-establishment in the press, that the press is not telling us what is happening. That in 1966, 29% of the people had respect for the press and TV coverage, and 50% had some respect, and now only 17% of people have respect, if you can go by any kind of a poll, for what the...
What poll is that?
Well, this was a Harris poll on attitudes towards the media. And people are turning away from the Associated Press, the United Press, the TV news. When I say people, I don't mean the masses of the 200 million in this country, but certain groups of people, the kind that listen to this show, that are listening to what they refer to as the underground radio stations all over the nation, FM, and the TV stations that are not financed by the big advertisers. In those newspapers, you're getting a certain amount of truth, and they're growing, they're mushrooming all over the country, because the truth is not being told. When I talk to the class, I'll go into where is truth and where are the lies, and the result is that newspapers like the Los Angeles Free Press or the LA News Advocate or the Star down there or the Berkeley Barb or the Good Earth and the Panther newspaper are telling you they're forced to publish information, they're forced to go into print to tell you some of the lawsuits that are happening, who's being murdered, and how cases are being distorted. And also in the news this week, Phil, I don't know if you saw it, was a group of supporters for Angela Davis who are printing their own newspaper, and it's called Frame Up. And it comes out of San Francisco, and they have 1,000 copies that they're mailing to the national, it's from the headquarters of the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis. But it's going out to various news media all over the country, to 250 U.S. newspapers and radio and television stations and 50 international contacts about what is happening in the courtroom. You know, we talked last week about the trial of Hugo Pinnell, and there was no news coverage of that at all. The 3 or 4 paragraphs that were in the Herald I consider not news coverage of any kind. And I wanted to get a written memo or a book form made up of the notes of people who attended that meeting, and then we'll try to get those out like the people covering the Angela Davis trial. The people are going to have to take it into their own hands and attend the trials and take notes, mail these things out to the newspapers, radio, and television stations. And they're not the major networks. They're, again, what we refer to as the underground. Now, a lot of people like to put down the underground news or the underground station as being radical or communist or leftist. Certain lawsuits that are filed exist. That isn't a political situation. They exist in Los Angeles or all around this country. The people are being railroaded through these trials. They can't have the lawyers they want. And the term underground is turned around here in this country because in Germany, people were forced to go underground. People like Sartre and Beckett fought with the Free French. It was a heroic thing to go underground. It wasn't a bad thing to get rid of the Nazis and fascism. You went underground. That's where the term came from. And this is what people are doing now. So I'll be talking at the class about lies and how the news media carries untruths, because if they can brainwash all the people in this country to believe that Oswald killed John Kennedy, or that James Ray killed Martin Luther King, or that Charles Manson killed Sharon Tate, or Mr. Frykowski, or J. Sebring, Abigail Folger, Steve Parent, Mr. LaBianca, Mrs. LaBianca, or the news tells you John Fraser killed Dr. Oda, or Mrs. Virginia Oda, or Taggart Oda, or Derek Oda, or Dorothy Caldwell, the secretary at the home, or that Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy, or Hugo Pinell killed the guard, Mr. McCarthy. These are news media fabrications working within the conspiratorial system that we talk about.
In every case.
In every case, yes.
That's quite a charge to make.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what you've been talking about for the last year, so I won't ask you to defend it all.
No, now, the interesting thing about these charges, and you see, the trouble with these charges, Phil, is in the documentation of them. I've made charges, you see, about these things. And we know that Sirhan and Manson and James Ray and now Hugo Pinell are slated, with the death penalty temporarily is off, but they're on death row, or Pinell has another trial to go, but he got a manslaughter charge. Now, to prove that I am wrong, it would be interesting to get the evidence in each of those cases. You see, the media plays up what the public defender or the prosecutor or the judge does, but they never point out what should have been admitted as evidence and wasn't allowed. And it's very interesting that I make these strong charges, and at the same time I make them that only 2 men in the state of California are working night and day for the death penalty. And that's Attorney Ebel Younger, who wants to get on the ballot. He's the Attorney General of the state of California, and he was formerly the District Attorney of L.A., Los Angeles. And Peter Chang is a District Attorney of Santa Cruz. Now, the Frazier case, the Oda murder, took place in the city of Santa Cruz, and Ebel Younger was District Attorney in Los Angeles at the time of the killing of Robert Kennedy and the Sharon Tate massacres of those 7 people. And the patsies that are sitting up on death row are there, and these men, Peter Chang and Ebel Younger, want them legally exterminated by gas or electricity. They want them done away with. And I claim that if these men had amnesty and were in the hands of the right people, that Mr. Younger and Chang would change seats with them. And I feel this very strongly. Now, Mr. Younger is a great man on the law and order team. He's in the worked for the FBI, and he has a position in the military, a reserve position, an officer in the military. And he's working very hard to get this death penalty, but Ebel Younger has not answered certain suits in Los Angeles. The evidence is locked up on these murder trials. And as long as it's locked up and they're conducted the way they are, those men should not get the death penalty. Nobody should get the death penalty. But I feel that it's significant that these 2 men are fighting so hard. Wherever you read an article about the death penalty, their name is connected with it. Nobody else's hardly but theirs, and the police enforcement agencies. Now, this last week, Mr. Chang had a petition in his office about the death penalty in the district attorney's office. And the group at Santa Cruz objected and said that if you want a petition to get the death penalty onto the ballot at the next election, then you should have the petition to legalize marijuana. So they said, if you can use your office for this one initiative, you can use it for the other. So for one day or so, he decided he'd do that, and he promised that he wasn't using the district attorney's time to fight the capital punishment, that the peace officers are doing the work and the peace officers' wives are doing the mailing. And he bows out his responsibility that it's done on volunteer time. But then he removed the pot petition Thursday because it was as ridiculous as the death penalty initiative. If he had one, he had to have the other. And this is where the young people today can get actively involved, and while they're supporting their pot thing, they force his petition out of his office, and I think they should work harder to, if he wants the death penalty on the ballot. So I think that the young people who register to vote, just all over this state, should make it very clear or get into their heads that these could be patsies. And the reason Chang wants them, Younger, is because if they live, they might talk. Now, I brought in this suit that I've read several times on this program. It was filed in the Superior Court of California, a complaint for the disclosure of information. And it was brought pursuant to Government Code 54950 on facts and information that exist because the legislature declares that the public, commission, board, and councils and other public agencies in this state exist to aid in the conduct of people's business. And it is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and the deliberations be conducted openly.
And what is this all?
Well, this is a suit
all
against
about here?
Evel Younger is named as a defendant in a suit that was filed in California, in the state of California, for hiding the conspiracy to kill Robert Kennedy. The suit says that defendant Evel Younger was empowered and has the responsibility to set policy for and to make and enforce necessary and desirable rules and regulations of his office of district attorney. And he is sued individually and in his capacity as representative of the member of the office of district attorney who have carried out and continue out a course of conduct which has suppressed and continues to suppress important, valuable, and relevant information concerning the investigation of the murder of Senator Robert Kennedy, and particularly concerning the prosecution in the trial of the people of the state of California versus Sirhan Bashar Sirhan. And he has continued to deprive the citizens and residents of the state of California the full and uncensored information concerning the said murder. Now, this suit was filed against Evel Younger in 1970. It was filed again in 1971. He never answers this suit, and yet he wants Sirhan to get the death penalty.
What is the status of it, of this suit?
Unanswered. This is the law and order chief it's unanswered. It's just hanging. There's no response. Also mentioned in this suit was Robert Houghton, who's chief of all law enforcement in the state of California. He was chief of detectives at the time Robert Kennedy was killed. When the suit was filed, he was deputy chief of police in the city of Los Angeles, and now he's the chief of all law enforcement in the state of California, and he's a defendant in the suit of hiding the conspiracy to kill Robert Kennedy. It said it was written for this. His book was written for the sole purpose. He wrote a book called A Special Unit Senator, and it was written for the sole purpose of acquainting the American people with the facts of the investigation and the evidence or lack of evidence as it exists of conspiracy. And the suit is to stop that book from publication because it does not go into the evidence which he had. They have asked this book to be stopped from being sold on the basis that it does not tell the truth about the assassination.
Well, this was filed in a court of law?
Uh-huh.
Has any action been taken?
No, they don't answer.
Do they have to answer for the courts to take
Well, I
action?
should think they would. Do you have to answer if you're, if a suit is placed against you?
I would think so.
Well, in my
either the court throws it out or the court brings it to trial.
That's right. And if they
Hasn't
throw
been
it
brought
out,
to trial.
no. In the conspiracy newsletter that I'll be publishing, I'll put the dates of these suits, and then you people will have them and read them. This will be the value of a newspaper every 2 weeks, because what I'm talking about on the radio, it's hard for people to get. I talk fast. It's hard to follow up some of this, and I'll be publishing this kind of thing. One of the 28 columns is going to be lawsuits placed against the government or national archives that have been refused or that are pending or coming up concerning all the political assassinations. I'll take suits of James Ray's and what he claims, and I'll take things on the John Kennedy murder. If people want access to the bullets or the clothing or the access to information on the James Ray, the killing of Martin Luther King. One column that will come out in every issue will be lawsuits, and I'll have this kind of material where people can hold it and read it. And then I'll put below the name of the publication where they can look it up for themselves. Now, last week we talked about Hugo Pinell at great length.
Before we get into that, let's,
Yeah.
for new listeners who don't know what the program is about, we have been asked to sort of quickly say what the program is, and what we're doing, or what you are doing, what I'm asking about here.
Well,
Can we do that?
we're talking about conspiracies that exist in the United States that take place now, that the original conspiracy to kill John Kennedy was a military coup carefully staged and planned for a long time by persons in our government, by the intelligence agencies, the FBI and the CIA, and that these people have the power today to escalate the war, kill anybody that they want, carry on assassination squads that they support in various countries like Brazil and Uruguay, Argentina, and in the United States, and in the LA Police Department there's assassination squads we'll go into. The conspiracy to kill John Kennedy was not a single isolated conspiracy. It happened, and I try each week to give some documentation or evidence on the various murders and assassinations. We jump around from one to the other on some of the programs because the news in the week just keeps pouring out pertaining to all these various subjects. And last week we talked for one whole hour on Hugo Pinell, and for those who maybe didn't hear the show last week. I hope you did. You may wonder why Hugo Pinell fits into the category of the other assassination conspiracies. I didn't want to clarify a point which I didn't make last week, Phil, where I said Hugo Pinell was like James Ray or Manson or Oswald or Sirhan, that he was a patsy, that he didn't kill the person that the prosecution said that he killed, and that he was given this rap for a crime he didn't commit. But Hugo Pinell falls into really a different category than the other men after you break it down from there, and it's a fine point that Lee Harvey Oswald and James Ray and Manson and Sirhan knew what they were doing. They worked as part with the police departments and government agencies. They took the rap for the big people after they didn't do the killing, and the evidence was planted against them. They were involved in some way. And Hugo Pinell is getting a manslaughter charge and threatened with life in prison or death because he refused to be a patsy. He took a different stand. They wanted him to pin something on George Jackson, and then he would get parole and be out. And he refused to do it. He was smart because the men that accepted it end up in the same place that he did anyway. See, he said, you have to think I'm stupid, to accept your bargain. He refused to pin a rap on George Jackson. If the prison wanted to kill George Jackson, they'd have to do it themselves, and they did.
Okay, let's pick up that thought after we identify the station you're listening to. This is KLRB FM Carmel, serving you 24 hours a day.
Now, last week we talked about the trial of Hugo Pinell that took place in Salinas. He was charged with assaulting a guard, and he was given a verdict of voluntary manslaughter. I sent wires to Washington. I read that letter, the telegram I sent to various members of Congress on the air last Saturday about the Department of Corrections in California. And the night letter, the telegram said that Pinell had been denied all of his legal and human rights, and that the Department of Corrections, Mr. Pecunier, Attorney General Evelyn Younger, had to be investigated by Congress, that there was a conspiracy of the judge and the public defender and the justice system.
You haven't had a reply to this, have you?
Well, yes, I did. I got a call from 2 congressmen's offices, and they called me, and I'll give you the names of the people that I talked to, and they were meeting with the other men in Washington. The Civil Liberties Union has agreed to take this case on now. They talked to them in Washington. They have called Mr. Caldwell, Pinell's lawyer, and I got a call from Don Edwards. I got a call from Representative Conyers from Michigan, from the House of Representatives. And they wanted to know which of the members of Washington, of the Congress, I had notified, and I gave them the list: Ronald Dellums and Shirley Chisholm and Senator Fred Harrison. I had a list of 12 people that I had sent these night letters to. And I talked to each of their secretaries and asked them to take down a tape of what I was saying to them, because they were trying to find out, get a clear picture of what was coming on in here in California. And I said the very important thing, the first immediate goal, is to save the life of Hugo Pinell and Raymond Marquez and other inmates in the California corrections system, particularly those that wanted to testify for Pinell because they were threatened with electric shock treatment, brain shock treatment, and they were put in strip cells. And the immediate goal is to save their lives and get the hands of the officials off of these men and quit beating them up, and get some orders out to Soledad and San Quentin to get their hands off of these men and take those chains off and quit brutalizing them. And the first response I got also from Representative Kassenmeyer, when I spoke to him, was that Washington cannot handle the jurisdiction of California. So I explained to them that from now on, they have to get one thing straight, that this is going to be like a Nuremberg trial or tribunal, that this is not 50 separate states that conduct its own business, that the state of California is completely tied up into a total conspiratorial assassination squad that goes up and down this coast and all linked together, and that Washington will have to get into their heads that they're not only going to do an investigation of the state, but they can start with any one case, like the transcript of the Pinell trial, or they can go up to the Soledad, is that they can go right into the Robert Kennedy and the L.A. Police Department and the whole Justice Department of the state of California. And that these men, I know it's an election year and they've got a lot on their minds, and the timing of these things is coming close too, but this research has nothing to do with elections. It has to do with saving lives and stopping the killing. And in last October, when John Mitchell was looking for somebody on the Supreme Court to fill a vacancy, there were two men that he was thinking about recommending. One was William French Smith, and the other was Lynn Compton. And I sent out personal letters to every member of the Senate. That's a lot of letters to every single member of the Senate, 100 letters. And in that letter, I said that William French Smith was Ronald Reagan's lawyer. I mentioned the law firm he worked in, and Compton was formerly Chief Deputy to the State Attorney General Evel Younger. And I said in that letter that no attorney in the state of California or in the state of Texas, not one, associated in any way with public officials from these states should be considered for an appointment of this nature. All the evidence of the conspiracies to murder John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Sharon Tate, and other Los Angeles massacres must be examined out in the open, and members of the federal government of the United States must immediately stop promoting these officials into positions of increasing power. I went in, it's a long letter into the criminology of these murders, and I talked about the state of California. Now, the remaining of the program, I'm going to talk about an article that came out in the Los Angeles Free Press this week, because last week we talked again about Louis Tackwood, and I talk about him very frequently on this show because I'm talking about conspiracies in California. And for those of you who don't know the name Louis Tackwood, he's a man who worked for the Los Angeles Police Department for 10 years, and he surfaced this year as a provocateur and agent of the police intelligence complex. And the Los Angeles Free Press, I bought up all the issues on the peninsula for various people this weekend, so you'll have to order them from the Los Angeles Free Press in Los Angeles. There's a section called The Glass House Tapes that came out this week. It says the story of an agent provocateur and the new police intelligence complex. There's a committee in Los Angeles that is trying to study, it's called the Center for the Analysis of Law Enforcement Practices. And there's a group of people, it's a Citizens Research and Investigation Committee. And Tackwood is working with them, and he has a book coming out called The Glass House Tapes about the Los Angeles Police Department. My research the last 9 years is on the political assassinations. His ties in, what he's saying fits in with everything that I have been saying about the political assassinations, and particularly the state of California. Here's a man who worked 10 years in this particular system, and he has surfaced now. The issue of the LA Free Press is dated April 21st, and I wish many of you would order it. And I'm going to talk about some of the allegations that Tackwood has in this new issue, because last week we talked about his first surfacing and the things that he said. The Glass House Tapes, it's a book that will be coming out, is the story of an agent provocateur. And the Glass House is a modernistic building in downtown L.A. which houses the Los Angeles headquarters of the Intelligence Division. And from these tapes, Tackwood is making allegations against the Los Angeles Police Department. Tackwood first became known to the public at a press conference at KPFK on October the 15th, 1971, where he told of the Criminal Conspiracy Section, CCS, of the Los Angeles Police Department. They provoked him to crush the Black Panther Party, the Black Muslim Church, and they were involved in prior planning of the Marin County courthouse shooting where Angela Davis is being tried right now. He said the Criminal Conspiracy Section, in cooperation with the FBI, organized the squad we talked about last week, Squad 19, to provoke violence at the National Republican Convention in San Diego, where the president would have an excuse to invoke special emergency powers. Tackwood is a brother-in-law of the late James Carr. His wife was the sister of James Carr, who was killed up in San Jose. I've talked about James Carr the day that he was shot. I've talked about him on the program several times. This week's paper has an article that the men were hired to kill. They're up now in arraignment at the pretrial hearings in San Jose. The men who killed James Carr were given $540 to kill James Carr. This program is on the air. You can appreciate the day that I'm saying this Saturday, and mark the date down. And I will tell you that the Mercury this week, they began the hearings on the James Carr murder, and up there the lawyers and prosecutors can't find a motive. The motive is going to be the Los Angeles Police Department. that hired these men, just like I've talked about the Yablonsky murder, long before this woman began to talk about her father's involvement in Tony Boyle of the United Mine Workers. This case will lead, any one of these cases is going to lead right to the Los Angeles Police Department and the Attorney General in California. The evidence is coming together up and down the whole state. And these murders are done for a purpose. The purpose of killing Carr at this particular time is to cause uproar in the black community in San Jose, mistrust of the white community, to make Angela Davis's trial look like she's part of this very radical group that continue murdering, that somehow they're all nested together and working together, and it affects the minds of the community and the jury. And it's a smear technique, and then they can blame Carr for the murder of another Panther. Now that he's dead, they're trying to pin the death of Fred Bennett on him.
Will the prosecutor in the Carr that's investigating the Carr murder eventually come to the Los Angeles Police Department?
No, because the prosecutor, the questions that the prosecutor was asking Mrs. Carr was, do you know Fred Bennett? Because an informer of SDS had said that Carr had shot Bennett. And they're looking for problems between the Panther Party, between themselves, as the motive for the murder. But on to the Tackwood article, this is what he said would happen. The article came out April 21st, and then a week later, the prosecutor's doing exactly what he said they would do. Now, Tackwood said that Jerry Cohn, who's a writer for the Los Angeles Times, had met with Carr, and he knew Carr's allegations, and he knew that what Carr said, he met with Tackwood, and he knew what Tackwood said about Carr's death and how they would try to pin it down to the Panthers and Huey Newton. And Jerry Cohn doesn't write this in the paper. When he writes for the LA Times, he writes about smearing Angela Davis or bringing in the Panthers. Jerry Cohn is a writer for the LA Times who could bring in things that Louis Tackwood has said, the foreknowledge that they were going to kill Carr. He said the Los Angeles Police Department had him marked a year before, and they were ready to kill him. Tackwood claims that Carr was scheduled for assassination 1 year ago in Los Angeles as part of a plan by the criminal conspiracy section to divide and create divisions within the radical movement and eliminate its leadership. He says the Los Angeles criminal conspiracy section. Tackwood further claims that Carr and Huey Newton supposedly were to be set up for a bust in connection with the death of Fred Bennett. The LA Police Department would say that Carr and Newton were connected with the death of Bennett, and they would do it by a police agent named James Mosher, who would go to a congressional subcommittee. Now, Jerry Cohn wrote in the LA Times that he conceals the link-up of the knowledge that Carr and Tackwood's knowledge of James Carr. He hides all that and writes a smokescreen about the Black Panther Party being involved, or the Angela Davis Committee. That's what we talked about the first issue about news media control. Jerry Cohn knows that the criminal conspiracy section was planning to kill Carr. And then after Carr is dead, he puts up all these other screens and blames it on the Panthers. Now, this last week, the New York Times was filled with articles about a shootout of the black Muslims. And I have a suggestion for people. I'm going to go off the article for 1 minute about Tackwood. In the newsletter I have out, one of the 28 columns is called You Be Your Own Sleuth. And I'll give certain projects for people to do to begin to study, because they can't learn it all from me. They have to figure this out themselves, some of it. So one of the things is to get a manila folder or an envelope or a paper clip, and every time there is a death that makes a lot of attention in the news of the mafia, the Muslims, the Panthers, black groups, or labor leaders, or Chicano or Mexican Americans, cut that article out and put it in an envelope. No matter what the prosecution says, or the police says, or the news says, cut those out and see what these shootouts are about. And a year later, compare the evidence with the original news coverage. There was a shootout of the black Muslims in New York City last week, and I started a file on the Muslims about 6 months ago when I realized that the intelligence agencies, police agencies, would use groups against each other and say that the Muslims are killing each other off. There were a lot of shootings in San Francisco and Oakland and New York. So last week at the Muslim church and school where a lot of children were assembled and people were assembled, the police department broke in, similar to the Hampton shooting in Chicago. They didn't kill anybody, but they broke in and shot the building with holes and terrorized people and took some off to jail that were left out. And they were told that they had a call on their radio that somebody on the second floor was endangering lives, and these men came in with a clipboard in their hands and not with guns. So the Muslim chief said it couldn't be possible that they were coming in to defend somebody who was in trouble. But they marched in and took people off, and there was a big race war on the street in Harlem of the Muslims and the police, and an altercation. And an unknown person called the police to say that he's unidentified, to say that something was happening at the Muslim church. Well, Louis Tackwood tells at the time that he called the police to tell them the Muslims in Los Angeles had guns, and they didn't. It was a case for the LA Police Department to all march in, take over. They didn't find anything there, but to provoke, it gets the headlines that they went there. And then later, when there's nothing there, it doesn't make the headlines. And Tackwood told his tactics in the LA Police Department in working as his agent, and this was a year ago that he's telling about, well, the going into the Muslim church is about a year and a half back or two, but he's confessing all this now. And then in New York City this week, an unknown caller comes, again the police come, shoot the building, could have endangered the children, start a race war on the street, and you have the same agent provocateur. You see, it's happening in California, and this man's telling how he does it. It's happening in New York City, if I read the New York Times. And again, these unknown calls, unidentified people tipping off. And then the police just come in, start shooting, and the masses get angry at the police, and then the police get more money for more arms because the people are angry at the police. It's a vicious circle, and it's hard to summarize, but you know what I'm trying to say, that the conspiracy from John Kennedy on down the street program is just continuous. Now, the committee that are investigating what is happening to the California law enforcement up and down the coast has an address in Venice, California, 22 Paloma Court, Venice, California, 90291. It's the Citizens Research and Investigation Committee. And they are unraveling that city and this state. There's a group of people working very hard and putting this information together. And now they have a publisher for Tackwood's book. It's going to be published by Avon Press. When the LA Free Press came out, they were asking for help for people to help protect the life of Tackwood, because he was out on a parole these 10 years working for the LA Police Department. And now that he's talking, they want to pull him back into the hands of the police department. And you know then what would happen to him. But the technique of the system is often to use men out on parole, because then you have a string to pull them back. And James Ray was on parole, and Charles Manson was on parole, and you have a way to bring the men back into the jail and then take care of them if they blow their cover.
So what's being done to protect Tackwood?
Well, the main protection, I think, is the people who listen to my show, and if they have a wrist and a piece of paper and an 8-cent stamp, begin to write letters to Washington, to any members of Congress that they trust, and say, we no longer have confidence in the state of California. We don't have the evidence, but we hear somebody telling us that something is wrong, and a lot of these things are fitting together that we listen to. And if they would keep writing, hopefully I wish people would write more letters and show an active interest in what's happening and try to save the lives of people like Hugo Pinnell and Louis Tackwood, and not get them back into the prison system. There's a long control here of the men, as I say, the men who were out. Were ex-convicts. The man who was hired to kill Yablonsky was an ex-convict. The man who was hired to kill Chavez was on parole. Martinez, the Chicano informer who worked for the LA Police Department and in Texas, surfaced. We've done shows about him. He was out on a narcotics rap they could put him in. They let Louis Tackwood out originally, on a parole thing. And then they're free, to move around. And if anything gets too heavy, they say, wait, you violated your parole. As long as they serve the system, they're okay. I have a letter from a man who's up in death row. It isn't death row now. I hope it never will be. He's up in San Quentin, and he's trying hard. He can't do very much to show his innocence from where he sits. We have to do it for him. But a letter was sent to him, and I can't mention his name. I want to protect his name, to the effect, do you know how high up your particular rap goes, who you were serving? And the answer came back, yet I have not discovered yet how long the leash is. And I'm still trying to find out, the term was who's pissing on which tree, what's happening along here. What is, who's doing to what on the lower levels. But I am not sure quite how long the leash is. They're confined in what they say, and everything is taken down, and who they're with is recorded. So it's up to us to find out.
As are their letters examined, right?
Well, it was subtle. The letters are examined. Their life is in jeopardy. This is why you can't write too much. Sure, it's examined. Everything is opened up, and everything that goes out is opened up. And when Hugo Patel went back after he was beaten up and brutalized and passed out in court and kicked and told, die dog and so forth, he was taken back to Soledad, and then because of certain things he did, like I don't know what the excuse was, they said that he couldn't have any visitors for 90 days. No one could see him, and then a visitor 30 minutes once a month for some indeterminate amount of time. This is all he could have. And, this is civil liberties.
But his attorneys.
No one.
He can't see attorneys.
No. So that you have, maybe let me say, I'm not really sure if his own attorney can get in there or not and see him right now. The Civil Liberties Union is getting into this. No one else except that man, and I'm not sure, if that's recorded. He has no visitors at all. Just like James Ray had his brother visit him about a month ago, and he's still trying to say there was a conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King. So after his brother left that visitation, and because of the visitation, and this is documented, the order came that James could have no visitor for 6 months, and the brother can't return. So no one's seeing James Ray. Well, back to the charges of the Lewis Tackwood thing, he is bringing in the fact that Congress has to open up this investigation. The L.A. Free Press has an article that says the Tackwood story is not fully known. The San Diego documents mentioned in the Glasshouse tapes will be published about the plan to blow up the convention, and there should be a Senate or Congressional Investigation Committee should go into this. Now, they are mentioning a Senate. I am writing letters to Congress about it, and it's up to you people in California to decide what kind of a police force you want and what kind of a prison system you want. Mr. Yevel Younger got a new crime lab set up for Salinas. He's getting them all over the state. And he selected one of 8 sites for a new regional crime lab that will take in all kinds of information of the local police. The 420 of the state's local police, the sheriff's departments, and 45 of the 58 district attorney's offices. And they will work through that crime lab. Well, that crime lab is only effective if Mr. Younger is trusted. If they can manipulate evidence, lose evidence, alter evidence, then the lab isn't effective. If the people in Washington can send out doctors and believe Dita Baird without sending their own doctors, if they second the doctors that ITT selects and they're under criminal investigation or should be, and they passed off a charge to break up their large corporation, just a tiny little bit of fraction, and they pressured everyone in Congress about that bill previous, to it being put into effect on the conglomerates. They were pushing that for a long time before their thing came to trial. It seems to me that in order to have a crime lab effective, you have to trust the men that run it. That's like sending stuff to Auschwitz and letting them determine if your bone was broken or if you died of starvation or poisoning or what kind of a crime lab is that going to be when cases are conducted like they are out in Salinas, just on the Pinnell case alone, or in the state of California. How can Robert Houghton or Evel Younger use the taxpayers' money to set up anything until we really find out if these special enforcement bureaus, like the group of the Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles, the Special Enforcement Bureau, or special groups that are here, these tax squads, do they turn in the evidence of whether it's a murder or a suicide? They don't have to go down the street shooting you. They can poison people, and remove brakes from their cars, and do all kinds of things, and just say the car just a person went off the grade. Their crime labs will look at a car and say nothing happened. They're only investigating themselves as long as they're defendants in a call. And that's the way I look at it. And I wouldn't trust them to go into a crime lab. Another subject came up at when Richard Sprague was here, showing the slides of suspects being taken off of Dealey Plaza. There was somebody in our local community who thought he recognized the man that was wearing this hearing device on his ear. So I got in touch with him, and he thought that this person was his first cousin, and his first cousin lives in San Diego. And he gave me the background of his first cousin, and he collects weapons, machine guns, and all kinds of weapons. He works for the LA Police Department, and he was in the military. And he's a very violent, radical racist. He belongs to the Minutemen, the John Birch Society, and has a stockpile of weapons. And he thought that this particular cousin could have been in Dallas at that time. And he identified him. So he went down to San Diego, and he was going to tell me the cousin worked for the LA Police Department. And he called me, I talked with him, and the cousin isn't working for the LA Police Department now. He's working for a crematory down in the San Diego area. Now, when people like Mr. Bingham, the man who can tell whether George Jackson really was shot or planned a shootout or even had a gun, that man is missing forever. And when you think of many witnesses that have missed from the face of the earth, and you begin to think of the dossier that a particular gentleman with that background now works at crematory in the San Diego area.
Circumstantial, but it sure is interesting.
It's interesting. Yes, it's circumstantial. It's interesting. It's interesting. You know, I've talked about before that Mr. Shaw, who's deputy county coroner of Monterey County, worked for Army Intelligence. His whole dossier is not on medical coroner work. It's an intelligence system with the Army. And it's interesting that again, in my newsletter, on the section called Be Your Own Sleuth, I'll ask people who subscribe in 50 states, whatever cities, to do a background on the coroner of their particular community. If it's a civil service job and you're paying it as a taxpayer, I'm going to throw out the question, should that be public domain, what experience he has? Particularly since Stuart Bryan, the controversial coroner in Los Angeles, was all these past years was saying justifiable homicide in the case of Mexican Americans and blacks that were being ripped off down there, and Louis Tackwood inside the police department was saying they were planned murders by the LA Police Department. The county coroner was saying they were justifiable homicides, and now it turned out last month or the month before that Stuart Bryan isn't a doctor or a lawyer. He was charged as a fraud just a month ago. He was placed in the LA Police Department to make the decision, and the black people, the Chicanos, were making a fuss because the members of their family were outright ripped off. And they knew something was wrong. And then the county coroner says, no, that's justifiable homicide. So I'm mentioning a man that works down at a crematory in San Diego. I'm talking about our own coroner. I'm talking about the Los Angeles coroner. What happened to Mr. Stuart Bryan in Los Angeles? You know what happened, Phil? He was told, it was in the LA Times just last week, and I should bring in the wording, he was given a reprimand of suspension for 6 months and told to go to a foreign country or another state and get the medical credentials he needs to return to be the head coroner in Los Angeles. For 3 years, for 3 years he was lying, or no, it shouldn't be that strong. For 3 years he was saying justifiable homicide and arguing with Thomas Noguchi down there that about the problem of the murders, how these murders occurred. The man was found that he lied about his experience to be even qualified for the job. I'm not saying he lied about his opinion. He wasn't even qualified. So he was told to go to another country and come back with the qualifications. And this is where international conspiracy comes in. You see, for those of you who picked it up in the middle or the end of the program, towards the end, we're talking about conspiracies and assassination, and this is called Dialogue Assassination on KLRB, and we're on every Saturday from 4 to 5. And some days we stay on one particular subject, like Oswald's trip to Mexico at a certain hotel, and some days we jump around like today because there's so much in the news pertaining to political assassinations that I don't like to fall too far behind. So how about that, Phil? Well, there's a lot of things, that, like, again, be your own sleuth. I will be glad to have a newsletter because that column, I'll say, what country would Brian Stewart go to get this medical degree to come back and be the coroner in Los Angeles?
It'd be interesting to report on when it happens.
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, as a sort of ramp-up, usually there are a lot of questions hanging when the show is over. A lot of people saying, "Oh, she can't say that. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, she's just pulling that out of thin air." There are a couple of alternatives. Sometimes you're around the studio for a moment after the program is over on Saturday. Sometimes you're not. And other ways, you can write the station, Dialogue Assassination, care of KLRB, Box 3904 in Carmel. And that's another way to get an answer. And Mae does answer all the cards that she gets. I don't know how she finds the time to do it, but she does do it. So if you write, you'll get an answer either by phone or by mail. So if you have questions, just don't let them hang, or just don't pass off the things that have been said by Mae on the program as gossip or lies or fabrications. Ask questions, and then if you don't get answers and you're not convinced, then you can make your own comments. But until you ask the questions and aren't satisfied, don't pass them off as lies or impossibilities. The newsletter, which is coming out, that you're putting out now through the Realist.
Yeah.
And repeat the
Well,
address again?
595 Broadway, New York City, New York, 10012. If you send $8, you'll get the Realist 6 times a year, and you'll get the newsletter every other week. And a lot of it will be, things that we cover, not too much to cover on this show, but some of it each week I'll put in the newsletter, too.
Okay, it's Conspiracy Newsletter, 595 Broadway, New York City, New York, 10012.